All right, everyone, let's get started with today's deep dive. This one goes out to Miss Hart's Year 11 Health and Social Care class. You guys have got that big tracking exam coming up, and Unit 1 is just around the corner. We're diving deep into how socioeconomic factors can affect someone's health and well-being. You know, the stuff from Unit 1 culture, ethnicity, jobs, income, housing, the whole nine yards.
Mhm.
And to help us understand these complex issues, we have our expert here to break it all down.
It's a really important topic, and we're going to connect the dots and see how all these things can impact someone's life, especially for you guys getting ready for these exams.
So let's jump right in with culture and ethnicity. Two things that I remember being pretty confused about when I first learned about them.
Yeah, it's easy to get them mixed up. I think culture is kind of like the whole way of life of a group of people, their traditions and beliefs, their food.
Hmm.
Ethnicity is more about like where your family's from and that shared heritage.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does all that affect someone's health?
Well, think about it. Like if you're from a culture where you only go to the doctor as a last resort, you might not get health problems checked out early on, and that could really lead to bigger issues down the line.
So your cultural background could actually impact how likely you are to get sick or how healthy you are.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, certain groups face more prejudice, which can make it harder to get good health care or even afford healthy food. It's a lot to deal with.
It reminds me of that documentary, Poor Kids, that we talked about.
Yeah.
The one with the family living in that house with all the mold and damp. It was so sad to see how their living situation was affecting their health. It really makes you think.
For sure, it shows just how much these things can stack up against people.
Yeah.
But there's another side to it too. Some cultures have really strong communities that offer a lot of support, which can be so good for your well-being.
So it's not all bad news then.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
think about all the different types of diets. Some traditional diets, like the Mediterranean diet, are really good for you. It's all a part of the culture.
Okay, let's move on to employment. I know this might seem pretty obvious, but how can having a job or not having one affect someone's health?
Having a job isn't just about getting a paycheck. It gives you purpose and a routine, and it's a chance to connect with people. And when you lose those things, it can really affect your mental and emotional health.
It's like that saying, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Well,
But I guess you could also say that all play and no work might make Jack stressed out about money.
totally. And if you're unemployed for a long time, it can lead to social isolation. Not having those connections can be really bad for you.
Yeah, speaking of connections, let's talk about income and social class. Those two seem pretty closely related.
They are. It's not just about how much money you have, but the kinds of opportunities that money brings, like being able to afford better housing, healthier food choices, and even private healthcare. Social class really dictates those things, and that directly impacts health.
I think I'm seeing a pattern here. It seems like having a lower income often means having poorer health.
You got it. And it can turn into a vicious cycle. Think about like a single parent who has to work two minimum wage jobs. They probably don't have the time or the money to cook healthy food, so they and their kids might end up with poor nutrition.
So it's like all of these factors can build on each other, creating this kind of snowball effect.
Yeah, exactly. And it shows that being healthy isn't just about the choices that we make as individuals, it's also about all of these larger socioeconomic forces at play.
Yeah, it really is a tangled web.
Yeah.
All these factors kind of pulling on each other. But let's get practical for a second. How can Ms. Hart's students actually use all this to do well in their exams?
Okay, so remember those practice questions Ms. Hart gave you. Try applying all of these ideas we're talking about to those scenarios. Like, how would having a really low income affect someone's ability to afford their medication? Or how would living in a crowded and noisy apartment affect someone's mental health? Think about those kinds of things.
So it's not just about memorizing the definitions. It's
Yeah.
about actually understanding how all of this stuff plays out in the real world.
Yeah, exactly. Think of yourselves like detectives. You're putting together the clues to understand how these different factors can impact someone's health. And those practice questions are like your training ground.
Right. Now let's talk a little bit more about housing conditions. We already mentioned that Poor Kids documentary. But how can a bad living situation actually make you sick?
Okay, so imagine living in a house that's damp and has mold everywhere. You're breathing in all of those spores all the time, which could give you asthma or other respiratory problems. And what if you can't afford to heat your home? You're way more likely to get colds and the flu, especially in the winter.
It's like your own home is working against you.
Right. And it's not just physical health either. If you're living in a cramped space, it can cause a lot of tension and arguments in a family. And if you don't have a quiet place to study or just relax, it can really affect your mental health.
Yeah, when I was a teenager, I shared a room with my sibling, and it drove me crazy sometimes. Having your own space is so important, especially when you're trying to concentrate on schoolwork.
Absolutely. And think about safety too. If your house isn't well maintained and there's like faulty wiring or loose floorboards, it could be really dangerous. You could have an accident and get hurt. There are so many things to consider.
So having a good place to live isn't just some kind of luxury. It's actually really important for our well-being.
Exactly. Having a safe, clean, and comfortable home is the foundation for good health, both physically and mentally. It helps you thrive instead of just survive.
This has been really eye-opening. But before we finish up, I want to bring it back to those exams. Do you have any last-minute tips for Miss Hart's students?
Definitely. First, don't try to memorize everything. Just focus on understanding the big ideas. Second, practice using what you've learned in different situations. And lastly, don't forget to get a good night's sleep and eat a healthy breakfast before the exam.
Those are some great tips. Maybe Miss Hart will even give you bonus points for mentioning some of these insights from our deep dive.
Fingers crossed.
All right, so let's quickly go over what we've talked about today. We started by looking at the connection between culture and ethnicity and how they can impact health. Then we talked about how having a job or being unemployed can affect both your physical and mental health.
We also explored the relationship between income, social class, and health, and how money often determines whether you can get good healthcare, healthy food, and decent housing. And finally, we really dug into the importance of good housing conditions for our overall well-being. And we saw how inadequate housing can lead to all sorts of problems.
Wow, it really is amazing how connected all of this is. Who would have thought that socioeconomic factors could play such a huge role in our health?
Yeah, it just goes to show that health isn't only about individual choices, it's also about the environment and the opportunities that we have.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, but before we go, I want to leave Ms. Hart's class with one final thought. We've talked about the problem, like all of these inequalities that exist, but what about solutions? What can we do even as students to actually make a difference?
That's a really great question. I think it starts with awareness, like really understanding these issues and how they affect people. You could volunteer at a local charity or raise awareness at your school or even just talk to your friends and family about these things.
So even small things can help create bigger change.
Absolutely. And remember, you guys are the future. You're the ones who are going to shape things. So by learning about these issues now, you can help build a fairer and healthier world for everyone.
I love that. So to everyone in Miss Hart's Year 11 Health and Social Care class, good luck on your tracking exam next week and crush those Unit 1 assessments in the summer. We're all rooting for you.
Best of luck. You got this.
And to everyone else listening, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.